Yes, I'm so happy all of you are here and had an interest in this topic. So just a little bit about me and my background. I am a second career librarian. My position is instruction and outreach librarian at Lenore Ryan University. That's in Hickory, North Carolina. And I've also been a master's level clinical psychologist for over 20 years. So I'm telling my age a little bit here, but I've done that for quite a while. And I'm still in private practice 1 day a week. I work at Crossroads Counseling Center, which is also in Hickory, North Carolina. And I do primarily testing at this point in my career. I test everything from ADHD to autism to personality disorders, all age groups. So I have a lot of experience in the field. And then several years ago, I decided I wanted to become a librarian. I always wanted to become a librarian, but the timing was right for me. And I was really interested to see that librarians were really curious about mental health issues and knowing more about that so they could help their patrons, and also knowing more about it for their own self-care. So it was a really nice win-win for me to have two careers that went together so nicely. I do have my personal email up here on the screen for you. So if you want to contact me with any questions or comments later on, feel free to do that. And let's see if I can get my slides to change here. Let's see. Oops, too many. Okay, so our learning objectives today, we're going to define what self-care is, why it matters, talk about the physical and emotional impacts that stress can have on us, ways that we can recognize signs of burnout and vicarious trauma, and then most importantly, how to develop some effective self-care strategies and know how to find professional help if we need to do that as well. So there's a lot of talk about self-care, and sometimes it's, thought of as just maybe a spa day or, something like that. But really self-care is an activity, any kind of activity that you do that's for the purpose of improving your mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being. So I think it's important to keep in mind all of these aspects of our well-being. So it's not just physical, working out, just spiritual, going to church, but thinking about all of these different things that we might do, every aspect of ourselves that can benefit from some self-care. So then we think, why do we need self-care? And there's just been a lot of things that we have going on in our lives right now. In the past year, we've all dealt with all the issues with COVID. There's been a lot of political upheaval in our country. I think all of us are facing financial stressors and unknowns. Work is always a given. Work, no matter how much we love our jobs, can be stressful. Parenting is stressful, and a lot of us are facing elder care issues as well. So these are just all things that we're facing in our lives that make it important for us to also make time and think about our own self-care. So now that we know that we have stress and all the sources of it, I want to talk a little bit too about what is stress. So again, people say, oh, I'm stressed. Well, what does that mean? So stress is really the body's reaction to any change that requires an adjustment or a response. So when we are faced with something that is a stressor causing us to have to adjust or respond, we have physical, mental, and emotional responses to those things. And it's important to keep in mind too that stress can be something that's physically there, like a patron who might be upset with you. But we're also experiencing stress when we're just thinking back on past stressful things. We might be thinking about the bills we have to pay or something bad that happened to us or what have you. So our body and our minds are still responding to that as though the stress is there. One thing you can do, you don't have to do it right now, but take a trip to the Mental Health America website. There's a stress screener there. And this is not a standardized report or anything like that on your stress level, but it is something that might help you kind of think through what might be stressful for you and what your stress level might be. And that way you can have a better idea of maybe just how important it is for you to start incorporating some of the self-care strategies that we'll talk about in a little bit. So one thing about stress to keep in mind is that, as we talked about, stress is really our response to something we have to adjust to. So that can be positive and negative things. So even if your life is going great and all these wonderful things have happened, you're having to adjust to changes, and that can still be stressful. So our minds and our bodies can't tell the difference between good stress and bad stress. They all require some kind of response. So positive things like getting married or buying a house or getting a new job, or if you're lucky enough to retire, having a child, those are all great things, but they're still stressful. And of course, on the flip side of that, things like divorce or having some kind of chronic physical or mental illness or a job loss or death of a loved one, those are all obviously clearly negative stressors that we might face. So if we have just ongoing chronic stress, I don't think a lot of us probably don't just have the occasional stressful thing that happens. It's probably an ongoing thing that most of us deal with on a daily basis. And so the impact of chronic stress on our functioning can really take an impact over time. And what we can see here is that stress really affects every aspect of our functioning, our physical, our cognitive, emotional, our behaviors. And so what happens when we first encounter a stressor is that our body produces adrenaline. I think we're all familiar with that. That gives us that fight or flight response. But what also happens is our body then produces something called cortisol, which is something that is to help us kind of restore ourselves and replace our lost energy after we respond to a stressor. But unfortunately, what happens is we kind of get into this cycle where we produce more cortisol than we can release effectively. So research has shown that with chronic stress, the prefrontal cortex of our brain will shrink. So that's the part of our brain that's involved in planning and organizing and learning and memory. So after chronic stress, that part of our brain is really impacted. But at the same time, the part of our brain that's more emotional and responsible for processing emotions, the amygdala, that increases in size. So again, we get into this cycle where we're hyper reactive to stressors. And then, we can't really get rid of all the cortisol and process that out of our body in a timely manner. So we just kind of keep going into that fight or flight mode, which then has an impact on our cognitive functioning. But you can see here, I won't read all of this out, but chronic stress can cause physical illnesses like heart disease, diabetes. People under chronic stress do complain a lot about not being able to pay attention or feeling that they have a poor memory. I've even had adults come to me for testing thinking they may have ADHD because it gets so bad. And, a lot of times we do testing and they really don't have ADHD. It is more stress and anxiety. Emotional to the point where people may even develop a mood disorder or an anxiety disorder. And then our behaviors, we see, a lot of times it affects our sleep and our eating, and we may engage in more bad habits than we normally would. So these are just all the ways that chronic stress can impact us if we don't try to take good care of ourselves and try to mitigate that. And this is just another little thing you can take a look at here. It's called the Holmes-Rahe survey or stress scale. It's also known as the stress or social readjustment rating scale. You may have heard of this if you ever took an intro psychology class, but what it does is it just helps you kind of tally up all the stressors you've had in the past year, and it's good and bad stressors, so it takes into account both. And it gives you an estimate of how at risk you may be to develop a health condition in the next 2 years. So again, it isn't really meant to scare you, but just to give you an idea of if you can do some things to engage in some regular, consistent health self-care, you're going to do a lot to help yourself from having the negative health and emotional outcomes of chronic stress. So. Now, there are some stressors that are particular to our work as librarians. And when I first took on a job as a librarian or wanted to go into the career, I did have some misconceptions. I knew there would be some stress, but I really didn't anticipate the types of stressors that would be in this particular career. And I love it. It's a great career, but there are things that are very stressful about being a librarian. The workload is one of those things. So with our workload, we it's fewer and fewer people to do more and more jobs. So I know that, with our budgets being cut, anytime somebody leaves a position, it's not always filled. So we really do have to cover a lot with limited staff. Sometimes there can be unclear expectations from management, so they don't always do a lot of work with librarians to prepare them in library school to become a manager. And so if you're not really clear on what's expected of you, that can be stressful. As with any job, there can be difficult coworkers. Probably the top thing I hear about in my trainings with librarians are difficult patrons. So just those patron interactions that are so stressful to deal with. Work interruptions are a biggie. So in my job as a psychologist, I get a client, we go back to my office, I shut the door, we're not interrupted, we do what we need to do. But as a librarian, there's many, many, many interruptions. It's often hard to finish one thing before something else comes up. So that can be stressful day after day. Budget cuts, like I talked about. Low pay, it's not a job that pays a ton, so that causes more stress as we have to worry about covering our own expenses. There can be a real lack of recognition. I think a lot of times people don't realize all the work that goes on behind the scenes as a librarian and all the things we do, and it's just not really given a lot of recognition by people. And we have very little control over the work environment. The library is what it is. We have to kind of adapt to that, but there's not a lot we can do to adjust that. And there can be limited opportunities to advance. So that can be stressful if you're somebody who really wants to move up in responsibility or leadership opportunities. So what I wanted to do now is maybe if we could have some of you just jot down in the chat some things that you find stressful as a librarian. I'm not really able to see that. So maybe if we have a co-host or somebody here right now, they can kind of look at that and tell me if anybody's writing anything in the chat. But I would just be interested to hear some things that you guys might be experiencing in your jobs as librarians.
Oh,
Um,
yes. The
I'm
results are
sorry.
coming in. Passion fatigue,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
unmasked patrons,
Oh,
testing patrons, especially due to the lack of computers we have.
mm-hmm.
Never have enough money to do what we want. The level of collaboration, communication, and cooperation with the team. Right now, trying to help a patron while staying 6 feet away.
Mm-hmm.
Lack of support from immediate supervisor, renovating, lack of communication, unclear expectations,
Mm-hmm.
unable to locate items that should be on shelves, especially movies,
Mm-hmm.
and angry patrons who don't like mask policies.
Right.
And it
So
goes on and on.
because I was going to say we can probably go on all day, right? And that is one thing I was going to say too, is that with COVID, we have even more stressors, like people mentioned. We have to now police people for public safety. We are all worried about our jobs being cut if our budgets don't rebound. And I know that in my library, we have this huge demand for virtual resources and services that we can't really afford to always provide. And I know that patrons can be more on edge now too, because they're also stressed by COVID. So as we can see, we have lots and lots and lots of reasons to want to engage in self-care, because librarianship, no matter what other people think, we know it can be a stressful job. So knowing all these stressors, it does put us at risk for things like burnout and vicarious trauma. And as somebody else mentioned, compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is a little different than those other two topics, and we'll talk about that too. But these are things that we have to kind of be aware of as librarians and talking about what they mean. So burnout, there has been actually quite a bit of talk lately about burnout. I'm working on a chapter for a book that's going to be coming out soon on burnout in academic librarians. And what burnout is it's a state of mental, emotional, and physical exhaustion that's caused by excessive and prolonged stress. So we're talking about overtime. Burnout develops over time. And the key feature of burnout is it's because of an environmental stressor. It could be the workplace. It can also be things like caregiver burnout, but it's something outside of that person that's causing the stress to be there. So in this case, we're talking about emotionally or physically demanding work. And there's several signs of burnout to be aware of. It's kind of a three-pronged concept here, that these are the classic features that go along with burnout. So the biggest, most common feature is the physical and the emotional exhaustion that people feel when they get to the point of burnout. And there's also a sense of cynicism and detachment. So the person may just feel like, everything's bad, glass is half empty, I don't care, that kind of feeling where they may not have felt like that before. And then also feeling just very ineffective, like they're just not making any impact, nothing they're doing matters. So those three things are things that often go along with burnout. The good thing about burnout is that it can get better. So if you make some changes in your workplace situation, your job situation, or maybe just really kind of make a strong effort to take good care of yourself, you can do a lot to overcome burnout. So things like, talking with your manager about maybe making some job changes, or even physically moving to a different job if you need to, always taking your time off that you have, and just any other modifications you make. We'll talk more about what you can do, but those things can do a lot to help you kind of get over, burnout. In contrast, there's something called vicarious trauma that's a little more challenging to deal with. And this term is sometimes used interchangeably with compassion fatigue, but there's slightly different meanings there. So vicarious trauma, the idea of that came about more in the counseling field to start with, and it's now considered to apply to any job that involves, helping people, any kind of job working service position with people. But the definition is the emotional residue of exposure that counselors have from working with people as they're hearing trauma stories and become witnesses to the pain, fear, and terror that trauma survivors have endured. So this was the American Counseling Association definition of that. And so really, like, over time, just seeing people suffering and hearing about what they've been through is what puts professionals at risk for developing vicarious trauma. So at first it might seem like, well, how would a librarian have any issues with that? But there's a lot of things that can happen in your job as a librarian that put you at risk to develop that. So one thing is just hearing the stories of your patrons. So they may want to talk to you or tell you what they're going through, the trauma they've been through. So if you're in a public library, you may have homeless patrons there. If you're in an academic library, you may have students that have been through something traumatic that want to talk to you about that. So just hearing about those things. Also, even if we don't interact with the patrons in that way, we can see when they're struggling. We know when somebody maybe is in a domestic violence situation, or it looks like though a child or a family is experiencing abuse or neglect. So we're kind of seeing what these people are going through as they come to our libraries. And then the other is we might actually witness verbal or physical aggression by the patrons in the library towards each other. Sometimes it might be directed towards us. So there's a lot of reasons a librarian can experience this vicarious trauma. And so how this differs from burnout is it really causes you to have this altered worldview. It's just pervasive. It changes how you see yourself, how you see other people, how you see the world. It really changes you as a person. Other people may notice behavioral changes in people with this situation. So they may not be as engaged as they were before. They may start doing some high risk behaviors that aren't typical for them. So just some noticeable behavior changes often go along with vicarious trauma. Also a sense of hopelessness. The person just kind of gives up. They just feel like, the world is horrible. It's going to keep being horrible. There's nothing I can do, and just give up. And also the emotional lability. So somebody who has PTSD is often very reactive in response to triggers. And sometimes those triggers are very subtle. In the same way, with vicarious trauma, if you have this, you may be much more likely to snap at somebody or to be more up and down in your mood. Hypervigilance also goes along with this, that sense of you have to keep monitoring and scanning where you're at to make sure it's safe. Is somebody going to do something? What is that person doing? And just feeling like you have to stay on pins and needles to be safe. And then one of the biggest features too is just you lose the ability to have empathy or compassion for others. So you just stop being able to care about what those people are going through. that are coming to your library. So in compassion fatigue, like I mentioned, is something that's sometimes used interchangeably, but really with compassion fatigue, that's more of like emotional and physical exhaustion that comes along with just kind of really giving a lot of yourself to a job, being very involved and compassionate, and it just kind of saps your energy there. But it's not somebody who's really changed how they view the world in a way that somebody with vicarious trauma is. So slightly different meanings there. But those of us who work with other people and try to help people, sometimes we forget that, we have to take care of ourselves first so that we can continue to give to other people. So we have to keep that in mind. Um, and so just kind of knowing that this may be something that could affect you. And if you feel like it is, maybe you can relate to this and think, oh, this is me. Or you have coworkers that you think maybe they're on the front lines more so in the library and you're concerned about them. This is a nice resource that you can access here. I've got the web it's hyperlinked, but you can also just click the image too. But it's from the Office for Victims of Crime. And it's nearly 500 resources that are there to help kind of raise awareness of this issue and also some ideas for how to address it if that may be something you want to do. Okay. So now that I've scared you to death, and we all know we have stress and we're going to get sick and all these horrible things are going to happen to us, we could talk a little bit about self-care. So the whole point of this webinar was to say, or training was to say, if we take good care of ourselves, we can function much better, we can do our jobs, continue to enjoy our jobs, and be happy in our personal lives as well. So now we're going to talk about how do you do that? How do you really take care of yourself in that way? So first of all, you have to kind of check in with yourself a little bit and think about, what do you know about yourself and how you already function in terms of self-care? So first of all, how do you experience stress? What are your signs that you're stressed? I know for me, I notice changes in my sleep and my eating patterns, maybe too much screen time, that kind of thing. So maybe just be tuned in when you notice yourself doing more or less of certain things, that's a sign to you that you have to kind of work to get your stress under control. And then you can identify what the sources of the stress are. So what is stressing you out? Maybe it's having to do too much of the parenting obligations at home, or maybe it's, the interactions with the patrons or whatever it might be. Then you can start to problem solve and think about, well, what can you do about those things, to try to get that under a little bit more control. And then thinking about how do you deal with the stress? So you're stressed, this is the stress. Are you doing healthy coping mechanisms, or do you kind of more regress into some unhealthier things? And a really nice tool to help with this is the SelfCare assessment from the University of Buffalo School of Social Work. They have a nice website with lots of great resources on there. This is something I provided as a handout for you, or you can just click this link here to access it. But what it is it just kind of takes you through, like we talked about with self-care, all the aspects of it. What are you doing in terms of your physical, psychological, spiritual, relationship, professional self-care? And you're trying to just look across that for patterns that are going to help you get back into balance in terms of your work life, your personal life, and making sure that you're kind of addressing all the different aspects of your self-care. So it gives you a first glance at where you're at with those things. So now we'll just talk a little bit about doing some good self-care, both in your personal life and your work life. So, and again, the goal is balance. You want to really respect your own personal time and your personal life. It's not all about work. And what can you do in your free time in your personal life to really revive yourself? So of course, exercise is important. That doesn't mean you have to go to the gym or like rigorously work out, but even just moving around at least 20 to 30 minutes a day, just making sure you're getting some activity. Trying to eat as healthy, balanced diet as possible, to trying to keep an eye on that and take in some healthy nutrition there. Really making sure that we're taking advantage of the support of our family and friends. So I know when I'm busy, it's hard, and I think, well, I'll see them later, I'll do that later. But that's really when you need to make time for your supports, because you're going to be more productive and more efficient at work when you have time to spend with people that are important to you outside of work. Sleep's always a big one. Sometimes we develop some poor sleep habits, and we have to really address that and figure out how to correct that. But sleep is essential for us to function well. Staying hydrated, carry a big bottle of water around with you. Make sure that you're staying hydrated is important. There's tons of apps that can help you with that too. And then the pampering. So, we've work a lot, we're dealing with a lot of stressful things. So making sure that you do work in some time that's just for you, that's just for things that you enjoy, and that it's okay to spoil yourself a little bit here and there. And finding a hobby can be helpful. So even though we all feel pressed for time and we don't feel like we have time for something like that, it really is important to find something that you do just because you like it. It's not productive. It's not something that's going to further your career. You just like it. And making sure that you make time for that. Spirituality, that does not mean it has to be formalized religion or anything like that. Spirituality can even just be, being out in nature or whatever that means to you. But knowing that you have to address that aspect of yourself and give time for that as well. And then mindfulness is a tool that I'm sure we've all heard of. We'll talk a little bit more about what mindfulness is, but being able to work that into our lives can really have a lot of benefits as well. Now at work, there's some things we can do to really try to take care of ourselves as well. And it may not be as much fun as going for a manicure or a spa day, but it's going to be really help us set some boundaries and limits too. So one of the top things you can do is really be respectful of your own time. So like I mentioned, you've got your personal life and you have to guard that. That time is just as valuable as your work life. So you want to arrive on time and leave on time every day. And that sounds easy, but if you're feeling overwhelmed with what you have to do, you might get in a pattern where you're coming in early, leaving late, and you're just never really accomplishing what you wanted to. And it's just frustrating. So just make sure that you respect your time off and that you're there when you have to be and you leave when you're supposed to leave. And the way that you can do that is to set up your email to auto respond. So you just let people know. You might say something like, this email is checked Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then don't check it, so that way people know that if they email you outside of those times, you are not going to respond until you're there and you're in your work mode again. Maintain clear boundaries with patrons and coworkers. So I know when I started as a librarian, I was used to having my own office, and in my first position, I shared a kind of a small office with 3 other people. So it was really busy, and we were always kind of in there together. And it makes it harder to have boundaries when you're sharing a space with other people like that. So you have to work a little bit harder at that. But it's really important to maintain those clear boundaries so that that's not an ongoing stressor on top of everything else. Also with patrons, sometimes they may come to us and want to form like more of a personal relationship, but it really is important that we stay in our role as librarians and that we, keep those clear boundaries with them so it doesn't get confusing for them or for us. We talked about having heavy workload, so we have a lot to do. So one thing that you can do is to maybe talk with your supervisor or director, or if you're an academic librarian and you're in management, maybe going to your provost and trying to designate or renegotiate your responsibilities. So sometimes it's just a matter of we've done the same thing for so long that maybe just having some new or some different job tasks can be enough to refresh us. But sometimes it's just too much, and it's time to go in and say, these are the things I can do. These are the things I just can't find time to do this, and seeing how you can kind of figure out a way to renegotiate what you're doing. It's important to take your daily breaks. So, get up, walk around, get some air, walk around the library, whatever, but take your breaks, take a mental break. That's when you can also practice your mindfulness. So just make sure that you do that and give yourself that break every day. If you have vacation and sick leave, use it. That's why it's there, is to keep employees happy and refreshed and ready to go. If I know I've worked with people that have kept their leave for so long that they just lose it. So it's really important that you've earned that time off and that you take that time off to take care of yourself. And then just saying no to things. So there's a lot of opportunities that come up. Do you want to do this presentation? Do you want to write this article? Do you want to start this program? And sometimes it's okay to say no or not right now, and looking at everything you have to do and deciding it's just maybe too much. It's okay to say no. So these are all things that, we've talked about that you can do. And, it's easy to say, oh yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to take better care of myself. But how do you make that last? How do you do that more than just for a week or two? So really you want lasting change. So try to focus on just one behavior at a time. So if you're listening to this and thinking, oh no, I don't do any of these things right. I don't sleep. I don't eat right. I'm not going to physical activity. It's okay. You just gotta maybe prioritize the things you really want to change. And we got those worksheets that we'll talk about that you can use too. And just do one thing at a time. So maybe sleep's the most important thing, getting your sleep cycle right. So you can focus on that, or getting some activity level. And then start small. So if you're not doing anything, start small. So even if you're just walking 10 minutes a day, that's a big change right away. And then you shape it over time. So you might do a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more until you reach your goal. So maybe your goal is to walk 30 minutes a day. So maybe you walk 10 minutes a day for a week, and then next week it's 15, and then it's 20, and so on and so on. And before you know it, you're easily walking 30 minutes a day. It's no big deal. So that's what you want to do, is to turn the behavior into a habit. And there's lots to talk about. Well, it takes X number of days for something to become a habit. There's really no hard and fast rule. Everybody's different, but keep doing something until it becomes a habit for you. So you do it without really stopping and thinking, oh, I need to do this, or, oh, I forgot it. It's just part of your everyday thing. So stay at it until it's a good formed habit. And then reward yourself for the healthy choices. So if you've done some really good things and you've walked all week long and you feel good about that, maybe you can go out and buy yourself a new top, or maybe you can go see a game at the baseball or something, whatever it is, whatever your thing is, reward yourself for those positive efforts that you're making in your life. And then of course, once you've got that behavior down, then you can go to another one and say, well, now I'm going to work on this. So those are just some ways to help avoid jumping into change and then not keeping the progress going. So, what you can do too, and would be really helpful, is if you make a plan. So again, University of Buffalo School of Social Work, they have a My Maintenance Self-Care Plan worksheet that I really like. It takes you through all the aspects of self-care, the mind, the body, spirit, work, all those things. And it has you write down, what are you currently doing? And what is something new that you want to do there? What is the new self-care practice that you want to start? And what's so important about this worksheet is it has you think through and write down what could be some barriers to change, and how are you going to address those barriers when they come up. So it may be time is a big issue. You just don't think you're going to have the time. Well, how are you going to renegotiate your schedule or reprioritize so that you make the time? And then what are you doing that's some negative coping skills and mechanisms, and what are you going to use to replace that? So it really helps to put it in writing. And then if you feel yourself kind of backsliding, you can go back and look at your plan and remind yourself of what you were trying to do in the first place. So it's really, really a nice tool to do that. It's one of your worksheets that I gave you. Just to talk a little bit about mindfulness. I know that I can't believe there's probably anybody here who hasn't heard about mindfulness or gone to some kind of workshop on it. So I'm not going to belabor the point, but I just wanted to just kind of refresh everybody's mind about what mindfulness is, how you do it, and what could be beneficial about it for your self-care. So mindfulness really is just moment-to-moment awareness of one's experience without judgment. So that's how the American Psychological Association defines that. And to get started, really, it's not too hard. You don't have to have special equipment. You're just going to set aside some time, and honor that time, hopefully every day. If you could do it every day, that would be great. If not, a few times a week, like we talked about, shaping a behavior. And when you're doing mindfulness, you're just going to observe the moment like it is. You're not trying to change anything. You're not trying to reach any kind of inner peace. You're just in the moment as is. And you're going to make note of any judgments that you are thinking, when any kind of noise in your head, just let it go, let it pass over you. And then the goal is to then return back to observing the present moment. So mindfulness is a lot of practice. You're going to try to observe the moment, maybe notice a lot of chitter chatter in your head, overlook that, come back to the present moment, and not get upset with yourself if it's hard to do that, because it sounds easy, but it can be a little bit hard to do because we've kind of trained our brains to be thinking 1,000 things at one time. And so by trying to only be present in the present moment can be pretty challenging. So just don't get upset with yourself and just keep practicing it and giving it time for that to be something that you can do without so many struggles. And so if you can get into the habit of mindfulness, doing this, some positive outcomes are being less reactive to things, being more aware of what you're thinking and feeling and your sensations. So when you're doing things, that you're aware of how your body feels, what your thoughts are, what are your emotions. So you're more tuned into that. So things don't catch you as off guard, maybe. And you can act and engage with awareness and attention, being able to focus on what you're experiencing without judging it. And one of the biggies is just being able to focus on one task at a time. So again, people often come to me, adults, saying, I can't focus, I can't concentrate, I can't, stay on, finish something. So mindfulness can really help you to kind of get that kind of sustained attention and focus to just one thing at a time. We don't always have to be doing 3 or 4 things at one time. We can do one task at a time, and kind of retraining ourselves to do that. There's lots of different types of mindfulness activities you can do. There's structured breathing techniques, muscle meditation, walking meditation, yoga, Tai Chi, guided imagery. And like I said, I'm not going to run you through these things today, but you can easily Google these or find an app for these. There's some webinars too at the end that I've given links to help you if you wanted to try some of these things on your own. But there's lots of different ways to do mindfulness, and maybe finding the one that feels most natural or comfortable for you. So even though you may do these things and try to take good self-care, sometimes we get to a point where we still might need mental health services. And I know that it can be very confusing sometimes to navigate that mental health system if you've not done that before, or if you're not in the mental health field. A lot of times people just don't know where to start. So first of all is knowing, do you need to get mental health services? And that could be counseling, medication management. So looking to see if you're having impairment in your functioning. So any kind of diagnosis, what we look at is impairment in functioning. So if you are just not able to function at home, work, your social life, then that's probably the time to go look for some mental health services to help you get back to where you're functioning. Also, if your symptoms just aren't improving after you've tried to do self-care, mindfulness, these different things, renegotiated your work situation, and you're still maybe feeling a ton of anxiety, depression, what have you, then you probably want to go for some services. And sometimes people don't really have a disorder or a mental illness of any kind, but they just need somebody there as more of a coach. They're doing what they need to do, but they need somebody to help them stay on track and to kind of keep maybe challenging how they're thinking about things in their lives. And so just having somebody there to provide that support can be a reason why people go for mental health services as well. So to find a mental health provider, that's where it gets a little confusing sometimes. You can go to your primary care doctor. A lot of times they can be the one, they know who the providers are. They can refer you to a counseling practice that they know has a good reputation. You can also see if your HR department offers an employee assistance program. So a lot of times they'll offer a certain number of sessions for free. So you can try to do that. So, and then also maybe just not quite sure still, so you can contact your insurance provider and they'll tell you counselors that are in your network and what those counselors specialize in. So then you can choose who you want to reach out to. So a lot of times people too have some concerns about what's going to happen once I get, I make that call, try to set up an appointment. What's the next step? So when you first call, you'll talk to somebody who's a referral coordinator, and they're going to just ask you some questions about, what's going on. You don't have to give a lot of detail, but they just need to know enough so that they can match you with whoever the best therapist would be with that practice. If you don't have insurance or you just don't want to file it, you can ask if they'll offer a reduced fee based on hardship. So some practices will. When you first visit your counselor, that first visit, you're going to they're going to talk to you about your background information. So you won't really have a lot of treatment that first session. It's going to be more about them getting to know what you need and forming a treatment plan with you. And then after you get established with your counselor, you're probably going to be seen weekly if you can do that, if you can fit that in your schedule to go weekly. And then as things are getting better for you, you can kind of back off of that and do it less frequently. So that's typically how it goes. And then just to know when you're in therapy, don't expect a quick fix. It's not something that a few visits is automatically going to make everything okay. It does take time to build a therapeutic relationship, and it can take time to recognize those benefits over the long term, especially with something like we talked about with vicarious trauma. That may take a good amount of time. There is something called trauma-based counseling that may be helpful for you if that's your situation, but it's not a quick fix. Do know that you can have client choice. So it doesn't happen a lot, but if you happen to be with a counselor that is just not a great match for you, you don't feel like you're making a lot of progress with this for whatever reason, you can always choose a different provider in that practice, or you can go to a different practice altogether. So like I said, that doesn't happen a lot, but I always like people to know they do have a choice if it's just not working for them. And then whatever you share with your counselor, it is confidential, obviously, and it's protected by a HIPAA, the same as your health information would be. If you get in a situation where you might need some psychotropic medication, like a mood stabilizer, what have you, counselors and psychologists don't prescribe those. You would have to see a psychiatrist or a family doctor to get those medications. So, and they can help set you up with somebody if that's the case. Just be aware of that. Okay, so I think I'm getting to the end of what I have to say and show you a couple of resources here and then open it up to the chat if there's any questions. But these are just some national mental health resources if any of these issues apply to you, or if you wanted to share them with any of your coworkers. I do have some additional readings. A lot of these are just freely available online, things on librarianship, burnout, mindfulness resources. And then I found a number of webinars online that you could look at too that also talk about self-care, compassion fatigue, different forms of mindfulness, and also the vicarious trauma situation, or trauma-informed services. So I was talking fast. I was trying to fit everything in so we'd have time for questions. So that is the end of my presentation. So I'm going to stop my share and see if anybody has anything they want to know more about in the chat. Or anything like that.
Thank you so much, Dawn. So far, no. Oh, here we go. Any chance of getting those resources at the end before next week? We could see, Lonnie. It's we're doing 18 sessions in 3 days, and we're trying to process. I know who you are, and I'll see what I can do about it. But we're trying to. It's a lot of things. There's only 4 of us managing this conference, so.
And all of my resources are hyperlinked, if that helps. So if they're all in the slides too.
Okay, so thank you. Any other questions? I mean, I really enjoyed this presentation. It's very thorough. And let's see. Any tips on avoiding putting unnecessary pressure on myself to succeed at work? I notice these feelings aren't coming from anyone else but myself. It's definitely putting unnecessary stress on myself.
Right. So yeah, that's one thing we talked about at the beginning, is that stress isn't just, like I said, something physically there in front of you. A lot of it is stuff that we're thinking. And so our own self-talk, if we're telling ourselves, I need to do more, or this isn't good enough, or it needs to be perfect, we're just ramping ourselves up. So that's where, if you can get into the habit of practicing mindfulness, that makes you more aware of when you're doing those things. So it might almost be like a tape you're playing in your head, and you don't even know you're doing it until you catch yourself and you're feeling tense and uptight and all this. So by practicing mindfulness, you can kind of be more tuned in and kind of catch yourself when you're thinking these thoughts. And one of the goals is if you catch yourself thinking these things, is not just to shut it down and say, no, don't think that, but just to kind of reframe it for yourself. You can kind of think, well, you know what, I'm here, I'm doing my job, I'm doing the best I can, I'm happy with what I'm doing today, just trying to redirect thoughts that aren't really helpful for you and that are just ramping you up in that way.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
There's a question about, will we have access to all the resources for all sessions? Some sessions were full. The answer to that is absolutely yes. When you see when you get the link to the recording for one you've registered for, there should be all available. And if there's one in particular you didn't get into that you want to get access to, let one of us know, and we will definitely we'll definitely let you know. Another question: if I'm probably burnt out and unmotivated, work and personal, is there an easy way to start turning that around?
Well, and probably not easy, but the first step would be to maybe prioritize, all the things that you're doing, especially in your personal life. I don't know if you have young children or have older parents to take care of or whatever it may be, just kind of looking at everything you have to do and then seeing if you can kind of reshuffle some of those things. So if you have somebody that can help out with those things, and instead of trying to do everything, that person can do this, you can do that. So trying to rearrange all the different obligations, and some things just having to let them go. Like, it's be ideal if you could do all these things, but something's got to go. And so you can be realistic about that. And then at work, trying to talk with your supervisor to say, what about my job could be, restructured or rearranged so that it's more meaningful for me. Or sometimes people even do like job sharing or, aspects of other people's jobs that are interesting. If you feel like you've just hit a wall where you are, sometimes it does mean, maybe it's time to think about looking into other, job opportunities if you can. But a lot of times you want to work with burnout where you're at, so you don't just leave and get into the same situation somewhere else. So,
Any other questions? Dot, don't see any. So I'll turn it over to Dorcas for our closing. Thank
okay,
you
great.
so much, Dawn. It
Oh,
was
you're
really a
welcome.
great presentation.
Thanks.